She's just a base janitor, my sister Madison whispered as Aunt Kayla walked by. Someone give her a mop. The girls at our table laughed. Even Mom smirked. I didn't. I just stared at Kayla's back as she kept walking, quiet like always. Then Colonel Rivers stood up, his voice cut through the room. Clear the area. Sergeant Kayla's data saved lives. The room froze. My mom reached for her bag like someone had just exposed a secret. Madison's face turned pale. You could see the color drain from her cheeks. That's when I realized. We had no idea who Aunt Kayla really was. It was supposed to be just another boring formal dinner. Mom called it a military banquet and said it was a big deal, something about donors and base recognition. I didn't care. I was 17. All I knew was I had to wear an itchy dress, sit next to strangers, and pretend to be impressed by speeches I didn't understand. My mom, Valerie, was excited, though. She worked in corporate marketing and loved anything that involved networking, name-dropping, or being seen by the right people. We don't want to look like we don't belong, she kept saying while fixing my hair in the mirror. My younger sister Madison was 15 but acted older. She cared about looks, selfies, and who was watching. If something wasn't cool or expensive, she didn't care. And in her world, our Aunt Kayla definitely wasn't either of those things. We met Kayla outside the base. She waved when she saw us and gave me her usual side hug. She wore a navy blue uniform, simple and plain. Her hair was pulled back. She had that same tired smile she always did, like someone who works hard but doesn't complain. Hey, kid, she said to me. Glad you came. Madison didn't hug her. She just gave her a quick look and said, That's what you're wearing? Mom didn't even try to hide her frustration. Kayla, really? You couldn't change into something decent? This is a formal event. Kayla gave a soft laugh. I came straight from work. No time to change. But don't worry, I won't stay long. Just wanted to see you guys inside. As we walked into the hall, I looked around. The place was full of high-ranking officers and guests in suits and gowns. Everything sparkled, white tablecloths, tall glasses, polished silver. I felt out of place. Not because of me, but because of how everyone looked at Kayla. She stayed near the edges, helping clean, picking up plates, wiping down things. No one paid her any attention. She blended in, invisible. At our table, some other teens were sitting, daughters of officers, dressed in fancy clothes, chatting like they were at a school dance. Madison jumped into their circle right away. When Kayla passed by carrying a tray, Madison leaned in and said just loud enough for them to hear, She's just the janitor here. Someone give her a mop. They all laughed. Even one of the moms smiled awkwardly. I didn't laugh. I didn't say anything either. I felt this weird mix of anger and embarrassment, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to start anything. I just watched Kayla walk away like she didn't hear. But I knew she did. She always hears everything. She just chooses not to react, and that night, her silence said more than any words ever could. The dinner was in full swing. Waiters moved in and out like a silent rhythm, trays in hand, plates disappearing, glasses refilled without anyone asking. The room buzzed with soft conversations, quiet laughter, and the occasional clinking of forks against fine china. Every corner felt expensive. Every face looked like it belonged in a magazine or a war memorial. I sat there, trying to blend in, trying not to feel like I didn't belong. Aunt Kayla had disappeared into the background, just like she always did. I spotted her a few tables away, collecting used plates. She was fast, quiet, efficient, just doing her job. She had always been like that. Even at home, she moved like someone who didn't want to take up space. But now, watching her in that room full of proud officers in polished uniforms, I felt a strange discomfort rise in my chest. Everyone around her acted like she didn't exist. Like she was just furniture. Just a mop. Madison, on the other hand, was having the time of her life. She had already made friends with the girls at our table, Layla, Jules, and Tasha. Their dads were all high-ranking officers. They wore designer shoes, had perfect hair, and spoke in this smooth, practiced way that made them sound older than they were. And Madison, of course, wanted to be just like them. As Aunt Kayla passed behind us again with a tray full of glasses, Madison leaned over and whispered, "Someone give her a mop already." The other girls laughed. Not loudly, but loud enough. It was the kind of laugh meant to hurt. The kind that doesn't care who hears. I turned toward Madison, but I didn't say anything. I should have. I wanted to. But the words didn't come out. Instead, I glanced at Kayla. She didn't stop. She didn't even blink. Just kept walking, head slightly bowed, hands steady. She's like, their live-in maid, right? Jules asked, trying to sound curious but failing miserably. No, I said quietly. She's our aunt. Madison rolled her eyes. She's not really our aunt. She's like, Mom's half-sister or something. That doesn't make her less family, I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be, but no one responded. They just went back to their sparkling water and small talk. Then the announcer tapped the microphone at the front of the room, and a hush slowly fell across the banquet hall. A tall man in uniform stepped up to the podium. His medals glinted under the lights. I didn't know who he was at the time, but he looked important. He carried himself like someone used to being listened to. Thank you all for being here tonight, he began. We're here to recognize the men and women who've gone above and beyond in protecting the integrity and safety of this base. People clapped politely. Mom straightened her back and smiled as if this moment had something to do with her. Madison glanced around the room, checking who was watching. The man continued. Now, before we move to dinner, we'd like to acknowledge a critical contributor to recent threat prevention efforts on this base. Please hold your applause until the end. I leaned back in my chair, assuming it was just another officer being honored, but then he said, Operational Intelligence Civilian Recognition Award, Sergeant Kayla Winslow. I blinked. I thought I misheard. At first, no one moved. Not even Kayla. She's, what? Madison whispered. That can't be her, said Layla, confused. Mom's face tightened like she'd just eaten something sour. She must be assisting someone. Probably just mentioned in the report. But then I saw Kayla walking slowly toward the front of the room. She wasn't pushing a cart or carrying a tray. Her shoulders were squared, her hands free, her eyes locked on the podium. The man who introduced her nodded and stepped aside. He looked at her with the kind of respect I had never seen anyone give her before. Then another man stood up, bigger, older, even more decorated. His voice was loud and calm. Clear the area. Non-essential guests, please step back. At first, no one moved. Then the officers began guiding people out. Some guests looked annoyed, others confused. Our table froze. What is going on? Madison said. Her voice was sharp now, nervous. Colonel Rivers spoke again, this time more direct. This is a secure debrief. The intelligence Sergeant Winslow collected during her shift hours saved American lives. What you're about to see is classified. If you are not cleared, please leave the room. People around us stood up and began moving toward the exit. I looked at Kayla. She wasn't flinching. She wasn't looking for permission. She looked like she belonged there. Her mom stood up slowly, gripping her purse tightly. Madison didn't move. Her face had gone pale. Her mouth hung slightly open, like she didn't know how to close it. I didn't stand. I stayed in my seat and watched my aunt take her place at the front of the room, not as a janitor, but as someone we never really knew. The room emptied quickly, but it didn't feel rushed. It felt controlled, purposeful. 2 uniformed officers moved around, checking badges, gently asking anyone without clearance to step outside. Some donors looked annoyed. A few whispered to each other, clearly curious. But no one argued. No one wanted to challenge the tone in Colonel Rivers' voice. It wasn't a request, it was an order. Our table didn't move right away. Mom was the first to react. She stood up, holding her purse like she wasn't sure whether to stay or run. Her expression had changed completely. Just 10 minutes earlier, she had been judging Kayla's clothes. Now she looked like she didn't know who she was. Her lips were tight, and her eyes darted around, like she was searching for a way to undo something. Madison sat frozen in her seat, still facing the front. She's not really a sergeant, right? She whispered. She's just called that, like a nickname? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My chest was tight, and I could feel my heart pounding. Not from fear, but from the shock of realizing how much we had all gotten wrong. I was embarrassed. Not of Kayla, but of us. Of myself, for staying quiet when Madison made that joke. Of Mom, for treating her like an inconvenience. Of all the people in that room who had looked through her like she didn't matter, Colonel Rivers stepped forward again, this time addressing only the few people left in the room, mostly high-ranking officers, security, and staff. He nodded. Once toward Kayla, then turned to the rest of us. Sergeant Kayla Winslow, he said clearly, has provided critical data over the last 6 months through a civilian surveillance initiative, operating entirely unnoticed within routine maintenance. Rotations. He paused, letting the silence sit heavy in the room. Her role required complete anonymity. She volunteered, knowing she would be overlooked, disrespected, even mocked. She accepted that risk without hesitation. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Kayla stepped forward. She didn't look nervous. She didn't smile. Her face was calm, focused. She placed a black tablet on the podium, tapped the screen, and a large monitor behind her lit up with a digital map of the base. Red lines crisscrossed the map, highlighting certain areas, service corridors, fence lines, dumpsters, loading bays. At first, it just looked like a blueprint. But then, she began to speak. For the last 6 months, she said, her voice clear and steady, I performed daily janitorial duties across high-traffic and low-visibility zones. During that time, I was equipped with 2 hidden microcams and a modified badge transmitter. My cleaning cart carried a low-range field scanner disguised as a water tank. Her finger traced the red lines on the map. These paths represent movements of unidentified personnel, none of whom logged official base access. 3 separate breaches occurred in non-surveilled areas between midnight and 3 a.m., all within walking distance of the south fence. The room was silent. No one even coughed. She pulled up grainy video footage next, a person in civilian clothes climbing the fence, pausing, then moving across the base behind storage containers. Another clip showed 2 individuals near a fuel tank, appearing to take photos before quickly vanishing into the shadows. The timestamps were clear. The faces weren't. But the evidence was there. These breaches, she continued, were reported and tracked using the signal pings from the scanner cart. We connected them to a larger pattern involving supply theft and potential sabotage. One of the officers leaned forward, jaw clenched. Another scribbled notes furiously. Colonel Rivers spoke again. Because of Sergeant Winslow's data, we were able to intercept a planned attack targeting our eastern supply route. 73 personnel were scheduled to be on transport that day. None of them were harmed. I didn't know what to feel. Pride, guilt, awe, it all hit me at once. I couldn't believe the woman I saw every Thanksgiving holding a spoonful of mashed potatoes and offering seconds was the same person standing up there calmly explaining how she'd caught potential threats with a mop and a hidden camera, and she never told us. Not once. She let us believe she was just the janitor. Because that's what the mission required. Madison finally whispered, "Is this real?" Mom didn't answer. She just sat down slowly, like someone had pulled the ground out from under her. Kayla ended her presentation with no applause, no smile. Just a quiet thank you and a nod. She didn't bask in the attention. She didn't try to prove anything. She simply did what she was there to do, present her report and go back to work. As she stepped down from the podium, I watched her pass the same girls who had laughed earlier. None of them said a word. Not even Madison. No one saw her the same way. Again. And neither did I. After Kayla stepped down from the podium, the room stayed silent. Not the kind of awkward silence you get when no one knows what to say, but the kind that settles in after something huge just happened. Like everyone was still catching up to what they had seen. Her presentation wasn't flashy. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't try to impress anyone. But what she delivered hit harder than any medal or speech I'd ever seen. It wasn't just about security footage or tracking patterns. It was about who she really was. And how wrong we all had been. Colonel Rivers stood again and cleared his throat. Let's be clear about something. Intelligence like this doesn't come easy. It doesn't come clean. And it doesn't come without sacrifice. Sergeant Winslow risked everything, including her own dignity, to serve this base. She did that while most of us looked the other way. He turned slowly and looked across the room, as if he could see through every polished suit and expensive smile. This base is secure because of people who do quiet work in loud places. We owe her more than thanks. Then something completely unexpected happened. One by one, the officers who were still seated rose from their chairs. No one said a word. They just stood. A slow, solemn rise of respect. It wasn't a dramatic military salute or a round of loud applause. It was quieter than that, and somehow, more powerful. It felt earned. Kayla stood still at the back of the room, eyes lowered, hands behind her back. When she finally looked up, I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Not pride exactly. Not even relief. Just peace. The kind that comes when you no longer have to hide. Madison finally turned to me. Her voice was almost a whisper. I didn't know she was like that. I didn't respond. What could I say? We hadn't just misjudged Kayla, we had erased her. Treated her like a background character in our lives. Like someone who existed only to show up quietly, clean up messes, and disappear. I looked over at my mom. Her expression was unreadable. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were glassy. She kept her arms crossed, but her fingers were shaking slightly. I could tell she was embarrassed, not just because of what she'd said before, but because the woman she always looked down on had done something she never could have imagined. After the room was cleared and the remaining officers began quietly discussing next steps, a few of them approached Kayla. They shook her hand, thanked her. One even gave her a quiet pat on the shoulder before walking away. She took it all calmly, like someone used to being in control, even if it was in the shadows. When she finally made her way back to our table, none of us knew what to say. For once, even Madison was silent. She looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. Kayla looked down at us, then gently picked up her cleaning cart. Yes, the same one that held the hidden scanner, the one everyone thought was just for mops and sprays, and said, I need to get back to my rounds. She didn't say it to be dramatic. She meant it. Even after all that, she was still doing her job. I stood up. Can I walk with you? She looked surprised for a second, then smiled. Sure, kid. We walked through the hallway in silence. The hum of overhead lights, the soft squeak of the cart wheels on the floor. Nothing special. But everything had changed. Why didn't you ever tell us? I finally asked. She didn't stop walking. Would you have listened? That hit me hard. Because the answer was no. We wouldn't have. We were too busy believing the story we made up in our heads, that she was just a tired, quiet woman with a boring job. That she had somehow failed. But it was us who failed to see her. You saved people, I said quietly. I did what I could, she replied. Same as anyone would if they had the chance. But not everyone would have done what she did. Most people wouldn't volunteer to be invisible, to be laughed at, so they could collect information no one else could. Most people wouldn't swallow their pride every single day to keep others safe. We reached the end of the hallway, and she turned to me. Listen, she said. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not ever. Just do your job, and do it well. Even if no one's watching. Especially if no one's watching. I nodded. I didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything left to say. That moment, that walk with her down the hallway, was the beginning of a shift in me. The way I saw people. The way I measured worth. From that night forward, I carried a piece of Kayla's quiet strength with me, and I never let anyone make fun of her again. The ride home that night was completely silent. No music, no small talk, not even the usual backseat bickering between me and Madison. We were all just sitting there, staring out the windows. As the base lights faded behind us, I don't think any of us knew how to act after what we had just witnessed. Mom drove with both hands gripping the steering wheel, her eyes locked on the road like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. Madison sat next to me, unusually quiet, her arms crossed and her phone untouched in her lap. I glanced at her once, waiting for some kind of comment. A joke, maybe. A sarcastic remark to break the tension. But there was nothing. Just a pale, shaken face and a girl who looked like she had just seen a part of the world she didn't know existed. About 10 minutes into the drive, Mom finally spoke, her voice lower than usual. I didn't know, she said. She wasn't talking to anyone in particular. Just putting the words into the air like she needed them out of her mouth. I looked at her. You never asked. She didn't respond. Her eyes stayed on the road, but I saw the way her lips pressed together and how her fingers trembled slightly on the steering wheel. My mom wasn't someone who liked being wrong. She wasn't cruel, but she had always been proud, maybe 2. Proud. And for the first time in my life, I saw her sit with her own guilt. When we got home, Madison went straight to her room without a word. No door slam, no headphones in, no phone call to her friends. Just silence. I didn't follow her. I knew she needed time to process everything. Honestly, I did too. I sat on the couch with my laptop, pulled up a browser, and started typing, Sergeant Kayla Winslow military record. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but I couldn't stop myself. I wanted to know everything I had missed. Everything I never took the time to ask her. What I found wasn't flashy. No big headlines or documentaries. Just small articles. A few mentions in military newsletters. A photo from years ago, where she stood in full uniform beside her unit in Iraq, half smiling, sunburned, strong. A short video clip from a safety award ceremony, where she accepted a commendation without even giving a speech. Just nodded once and walked off stage. That was her. Quiet. Purposeful. Invisible by choice, not by accident. I thought about all the times I'd heard Mom say, Kayla wasted her life. She could have done something if she went to college. But Kayla had done something. More than most people ever would. She just never needed anyone to know. The next morning, I texted her, I'm proud of you. She replied within minutes. Took you long enough, kid, and I smiled. Things didn't magically change after that. Mom didn't suddenly become soft. Madison didn't write a long apology. But something shifted. A quiet respect settled in, even if it was never spoken out loud. At family dinners, Kayla still wore her uniform, but no one commented on it. No more jokes. No more whispered insults. Just space for her to exist, as she was. The next time we visited the base for another event, she didn't sit in the back. She was at the main table with Colonel Rivers and a few others. And this time, when people looked at her, they didn't see a janitor. They saw someone who had earned her place, and then some. For me, the biggest change wasn't how we treated her. It was how I started treating people in general. I began paying more attention to the quiet ones, the security guards at school, the lunch ladies, the janitor who swept the halls after hours. I realized how easy it was to overlook people who weren't loud about their presence. And how unfair that was. One afternoon at school, I saw a group of kids laughing at Mr. Patel, the custodian. They joked about how slow he was, how his clothes always looked the same. Normally, I would have walked past, pretended I didn't hear it. But I didn't this time. I stepped in front of them and said, he works harder than all of you combined. You should be thanking him. They stared at me like I was crazy. But they stopped laughing. That was the Kayla in me. The part of her that taught me you don't have to be loud to be brave. You don't need medals to make a difference. And sometimes, the strongest people in the room are the ones you never even noticed. I think about that night often, not just because of what she revealed, but because of what it changed in me. Aunt Kayla didn't need our praise. She didn't need us to understand. She just needed to be trusted. And now, finally, she was.